Okay, so we have talked about what a function is, and a function is for every input there is exactly one output. And in the previous video, I gave you some examples of equations tables and graphs that were functions, and then I gave you some non-examples, so some equations tables and graphs that were not functions so you could kind of see the difference. Now the question is, how do I do it on my own? And so one of the tried and true methods that has worked over the years is to think of a function machine. So I'm going to draw my interpretation of a function machine. It's pretty bland and pretty simple. Okay, but in my mind, I have the machine itself with this input valve. So I am not an artiste, as many of you can see. And then I picture the output valve to be thin. As we talked about, there can only be one output for that input, and if more than one output tries to come out, that it would clog the machine and it would no longer function. So the function machine will no longer function. It's a joke, so you can laugh. This is pretty bad. Let me fix that. Okay, so I see this as our input valve. And remember so we would drop numbers into the input valve, and remember they're going to go in for X, as that is our input variable. And then this is the output valve. And remember that our output is Y. So if you go back to some of those examples I gave you, so if you go back to that equation I gave you, and this is going to be called the function rule. Okay, a function rule is just an equation. This is the rule. Okay, so we're going to determine, is this rule, is this equation, is it a function? So does it keep the machine running smoothly, or is it going to cause the machine to clog and blow up? So then it won't function anymore. So because it's not a function. So picking a number, if we pick the number 2. So we drop the number 2 into our input valve, and it goes into the input variable, which is X. And so basically then we have 3 times 2 plus 1. 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. That is only one output, so it's going to slide through, and everything's going to run smoothly in our function machine. Now, sometimes you have to check more than one. So let's try the number 10. Okay, so 10, while yes, it has 2 digits, it is still a single number. So we're not talking about the how many digits there are, just is it one number or not. So if 10 comes in, that means I'm going to take 3 times 10 plus 1, which is 31, which again, I know is 2 digits, but it's still considered one output. So it's going to come out and it's going to run smoothly. So this is a function, because when I enter an input, I get one output, and it's going to keep my machine running smoothly. Versus if I put this rule in there, the square root of X. So if I drop like the number 25, which is an input, in for X, and I take the square root of 25, the outputs are going to be 5 and negative 5. Well, 5 and negative 5 cannot fit through here, because that's 2 different outputs. And we can't have 2 outputs go through the output valve, so it's going to clog the machine, and the machine will no longer function, which tells me this is not a function. So if it doesn't keep the machine going smoothly, it's not a function. 2 outputs is going to clog it, therefore this is not a function. Okay? So that's how you can look. So if I look at a table, so if I don't have an equation, but I'm looking at a table, again, if I see okay, so now here are the inputs that I get to drop. So if I drop 1 into the machine, here's where it inputs. The output is 7, which is going to keep the machine running smoothly. An input of 1 gives me an output of 7. So that one input gave me one output. The input of 2 is going to give me an output of 9. The input of 3 is going to give me an output of 11. One input, one output. An input of 4 is going to give me an output of 13. All of the inputs give me exactly one output. My machine continues to run smoothly, so this table is in fact a function. Or, I gotta redraw that, it's getting kind of messy here. If I have, we talked about this table. Okay, this one looks like it might clog the machine, but this is where you actually want to stop and think about it and really run your numbers through the machine. So if I drop the number 1 into my input valve, it comes here. The output that goes with 1 is a 5. And that 5 is going to run through and keep that machine running smoothly. If I input the number 2, 2 is going to give me an output of 5. So 1 input, 1 output, the machine keeps running smoothly. So even though we have a bunch of 5s here, every input gives me 1 output. It's just that the output is the same every time. So I picture the Hershey's Kisses machine. I think of that factory and how only 1 Hershey Kiss comes out at the time. Now, all Hershey Kisses look alike, so it all looks the same as that Hershey Kiss drops out, but it's still only 1 coming out at a time. So even though it's all 5s coming out, they're coming out 1 at a time, so it is going to keep the machine running smoothly. Versus if I have this table, so this is 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I input the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are all going to try and come out of the machine at the same time. 4 outputs is not going to work. That's going to clog the machine. So that's why this one is not a function. And then I can look at an equation in the same fashion. So if I look at this equation that is a line and I input the number 2, well, let's say 2 is right here. So again, this is the x-axis, so that's where my input is. Here is its output, which is like the number 1. So there you go. 1 comes out, we're good to go. And so that's going to keep that a function. Versus if I have this graph, where again, if I drop the number 2 in on my x-axis, it's going to be the number 4, or maybe -4. Either way, there's 2 outputs coming out for that 1 input, so it's going to clog the machine. So this is an example of not an output. So here is a way that you can use this idea of a function machine to help you visualize when something is and is not a function. So your task is to create your own function machine. It can look very similar to mine, where it's very bland and not very creative, or you can get extremely creative with it. But the idea is you have to have room for your rule, and you have to have an input valve and an output valve.